I wanted to just start by welcoming everybody to the 2026 Noxious Weed Program Grants webinar. There's the title. And then here is the agenda. So many of you who have been having grants with us for a while know we did a webinar back in 2023. And in the past 3 years, we've made a lot of updates. So we just figured it would be good to do another one of these and talk about some of those updates. Of course, a lot of the things that you'll see today are the same. They've been the same for a while, but we do have some really exciting new features to our grants process. And so we'll go through those today. So a little bit about how we're going to do this today. We are basically splitting this webinar into two main sections. So part one includes the very short introduction that I'm doing right now. And then our program staff will each go through a different part of the webinar. So the second part of part one will be Emily Gilbert introducing all of our grant documents that you will become very familiar with, or you already are familiar with, according to how many years you've been doing grants with us. After that, we'll do some question and answer. So there is a Q&A box. If you have questions, feel free to put them in as we go, or we can just do questions and answers live after Emily Gilbert is done with her section. Then we'll take probably just a 5-minute break. And after that, we will start in with part two, where Truman will get us started with EdMaps project creation and how entering data into EdMaps into your project is going to kind of filter into the state grants dashboard and how it will be displayed. And so how to set that up and what that looks like. And then Emily McGrath will take us actually through the new state grants dashboard. This is very exciting that we've gotten this created. And so she'll take you through the actual form that you'll use to put data in, and she'll show us what that user interface looks like. So we all know how neat this is going to be when we get all of our grants in there. Okay, so I'm sure everybody is pretty much aware of our team at this point, but I wanted to make sure to go through some introductions. And these are listed in order of speaking order today. So as I think most of you know, my name is Patty York. I'm the Noxious Weed Program Manager. I, oversee the program itself. I have kind of that oversight of the statewide policy, rule updates, revising the list, the noxious weed list. I also am in charge of the Noxious Weed Advisory Committee Relations. The committee is a group of 17 individuals who come from all different backgrounds and are spread geographically across the state and do a lot of collaboration with us and advise us on different directions that we should go in the program. So we meet 4 times a year, and those are open public meetings. Everyone's willing or welcome to attend. And we try to make sure to announce those both in our newsletter and on our website. So we have one coming up in early June. I think it's June 9th and 10th. And that will be a 2-day event in Pagosa Springs with a business meeting the afternoon of that Tuesday and a field site visit and work day, a couple hours of working actually the next morning, which is going to be really fun. Okay, Emily Gilbert is our grants and outreach specialist. So she's going to be your primary contact for any grant questions outside of kind of your specific grant that you will have a specific CDA program staff member as your manager. Anything else that you, so in those situations, you'll want to contact your program manager to ask direct questions, but Emily Gilbert can answer any generic questions or questions throughout the year on our grant program, including like both in the application phase, notification time period, those things. So she also is in charge of all of our educational efforts and outreach. So she does our newsletter and does our boot brush kiosk program, which if you're ever interested in installing a boot brush kiosk, get in touch with Emily Gilbert. Truman Honorella is the newest member of our team. He started in October. He's our mapping and data specialist. So he's working really hard to figure out different ways to identify underrepresented species, underrepresented EDMAPS data, according to what species they are. Sorry, let me say that again. So underrepresented data in EDMAPS is a lot of our list C species and some of our list B species, and Truman is working to fill in those gaps. So if you have a bunch of list C data that you need help getting uploaded into EDMAPS, or if you need help mapping some of those items, please contact Truman for that kind of help. He also can be your contact for GIS mapping needs. Of course, Emily McGrath can do those things as well, but we all know she's out in the field all summer, so both Truman and Emily can be contacts for that, but this summer it might be a little easier to get in touch with Truman. However, they are both available. And then finally, Emily McGrath is our early detection and rapid response specialist. So she runs our EDRR field crew, which is a seasonal field crew that goes and helps entities with their high priority species. And then Emily also oversees the List B rule updates, which we are doing rule updates this year. In addition to the rule updates for the List B management plans, we're actually working this year to revise our noxious weed list. So if you have not filled out the survey yet on what you think we should do with a number of the species, both on our list and not on our list, please do that. And that's available on our website and in the newsletter. Okay, so I wanted to give a very brief overview of our grant process timeline. So we have an annual grants process. In September and October of each year, CDA staff works to revise our RFA, which is the request for applications, and then the application documents themselves. So that's when we are looking at the objectives and the items that we really want to see for that coming grant cycle, and making sure that the RFA and application questions reflect those objectives. So after we get those finalized, we post them on our website in early November. So November through mid-December is the actual application period for our grants. So that's when you can, as a grantee or as wanting a grant from us, you can go and apply for those grants. This period is the time when we're not really allowed to discuss specific project details. So if you have questions about a potential project that you would like to apply for, then please ask us those kind of project level questions before we've actually put out the application. In the application period itself, we need to make sure that everyone's receiving the same information. So that's why we ask for any questions to come into the weeds email, and we will answer that and then put it in the frequently asked questions section of our website. So mid-December through early February is when we do the review. It's our review period. We create a review committee that's made up of a number of advisory committee members from all different backgrounds. And of course, every staff member on the noxious weed program, along with other CDA staff. So we typically get somebody from the insectary and somebody from the conservation district, conservation board to help us review those grants. So that happens, and then we have a meeting to go through line by line each grant, how they kind of ranked and what items, were in the budget application, things like that, and make those really hard funding decisions. I will say that is an all-day meeting, and it is very difficult because we always have more ask than we have available. So after we've gone through that process, we send out notification letters in mid-February. And then after that comes the statement of work development contracting period. So March through May, the grantee will work with their CDA project manager on figuring out what that statement of work looks like. And then that statement of work goes into the contract. So then April through October, for the most part, is when projects are completed. We do have some grants that do some kind of winter work or early spring work, and so they kind of run through the turn of the calendar year. But generally, most projects are completed April through October, and then October through March is kind of when all of the grants close out. So just a couple notes about the statement of work development. So following that award notification, the grantees work directly with the CDA grant manager to refine the project details in that collaborative project. So the main things we're looking for you all to help us with to make sure that the statement of work reflects your grant properly are the key personnel. So who is actually responsible for project success and reporting, the performance activities and standards. We want to make sure that the exact project activities align with what you're trying to do. The list A and list B target species. So every single grant except one actually received partial funding this year, and we really anticipate that is going to be the situation moving forward, just knowing how funding looks. So we know that if you've applied for a certain amount of acreage and you only get partial funding, that you would very likely want to reduce those acres to match the funding that you did receive. So all of those edits are made during this SAL development process. Similar with budget, right? We understand that if you're getting less budget, then you'll need to adjust the items within your budget to reflect how that partial funding will apply. And that's also the time period where if there were items within the application that we said are not actually eligible for funding, we would take those items out. In this process, we do need kind of that final statement of work approval from the grantee. An email is fine, but just saying, yes, this looks good to me. We are ready to go. We need that documentation to make sure that the statement of work is absolutely reflective of what's going to happen in the grant period. And then that statement of work is used to create the contract document. Okay, so finally, a little bit of a hard point, but I just wanted to talk very briefly about the future of funding. So, as all of you probably know, the Noxious Weed Management Fund took a cut in 2025. So, for at least 10, I think maybe 11 years, we had a funding level of a 700,000 for that. And this is the only state funding that we have for noxious weed management. So this is, as many of you know, an unfunded mandate. And so we are really relying on those local entities to provide the funding for their programs and their activities. And so the Noxious Weed Management Fund is the only source of state funds that we get annually to help. And so in 2025, last year, that was reduced from 700,000 down to 450,000. And I'm just going to let everybody know, we don't know any specifics at this point, but we really are anticipating future costs on both the state and federal levels. We, we've been told that our grant programs are not seen very highly by the legislative body. And so if you have the ability to talk to your legislators or representatives about the Noxious Weed Management Fund, it would be advisable. We are likely going to see future cuts, if not next year, very likely the year after that, if the state continues to be in a deficit. And the difference between our grant program and others is that it is related to that unfunded mandate. So the fact that these are the only state dollars, these aren't additional dollars that we're handing out in grants. These are the only state dollars that we have to help fund this unfunded mandate. And that's really the message that we want to make sure that those legislators know and understand. So that's why another reason why documentation accuracy is really important. So we really want to make sure that we are putting all of those matching dollars in there, making sure we photograph our projects and communicate those success stories. These are the ways that we're really going to be able to display all the great work that's being done on noxious weeds in the state. And that takes me to the state grants dashboard, which is really why we've created that. So this idea came from the Western Weed Coordinating Committee. They have created a federal level dashboard already. And so all of our grants that have federal funding, we're already putting those grants into a federal dashboard. And the WWCC, which I am the chair of right now, actually, also received funding to help states in the West develop these state grant dashboards. So we have completed that. It's really exciting. And with this dashboard, we're really hoping to show how much really is contributed to these projects, not just from the state, but from all of those local groups, providing both cash and in-kind matching dollars, federal funds as well. Obviously, all the noxious weed activities that we are completing, and then all the successes that we have around the state. So, as I mentioned, Emily McGrath will take us through the dashboard later, but that I just wanted to let everyone know is one of the main reasons that we created that dashboard so that we could start communicating on that bigger level on what we are doing in Colorado. Okay, so I have just a slide with all of our contact information. I'll put this back up at the end. And of course, this is being recorded, so that's all there as will be there as well in the recording. And all of this is also on our website. Okay, so with that, I guess I could take any questions if there are any at this moment. And I think if you do have a question, you can just raise your hand or you can put it in that question and answer box. It doesn't look like we have any new questions in the question and answer box. So I think I will go ahead and stop sharing. If I can figure out how to do that. And, oh, you know what's over here? Great. Okay. And that's all from me for now. And Emily Gilbert, go ahead with your portion.
Thanks, Patty. I apologize. We're not used to Zoom. Can anyone see my screen? Yes. Good?
Yep, you can see it. You
Okay.
look good.
Awesome. Thanks. Hi again. My name is Emily Gilbert. I am the Grounds and Outreach Specialist for the Noxious Weed Program. As Patty mentioned, I currently manage about half of the active grants that we currently have. I will be going over the PO and the purchase order and deliverables and reporting documents with you today for this annual grant. I share, well, it's between myself and Emily McGrath. And so our information is at the bottom of the PO. So if you're ever wondering which Emily, the documents need to go to, that will tell you which one to send it to. Now that Patty has provided the high-level overview, I'm going to dive into the specifics of the purchase order and its process, as well as go over the reports, like I just said. In our program, you'll often hear us use the term contract, PO, and POGG1 interchangeably. They are all essentially referring to the official funding agreement. This is at this point in the presentation, or in this example, the grantee has received funds, and the PO serves as the official authorization to spend. It is legally binding document that proves that the funds are locked in for that project. And like Patty said, the first 2 pages are kind of the cover page, and then I'll go over the statement of work. For grants that have just state funding, that completes the purchase order. For people who have state and private funding, SPF, there will be a third Exhibit B that will complete the contract. Okay, and then on the Purchase order. So this is the page, the front page. At the very top, you will see this unique identification number. This, please make note of this as it is the primary reference that you will need to include on all the progress reports. POGG1 stands for Purchase Order Grant Agreement. BDAA is the code for the Department of Agriculture. Then it will be the year, and then the following numbers will be unique to each grant. Like I said, these will be referenced in reporting. The first date that you see is just when the purchase order was created. It might be the same as the dates down here, but it could be different. It's not as important as the following dates. For the description, it's the name of the entity, the year, and the funding source. And like I said, the effective date is really important to note. This is the official beginning of the funding period. No expenditures made prior to this date are eligible for reimbursement. If the grantee purchases supplies or begins work before this date, these costs cannot be covered by the grant. They can, however, be used as match can be accrued 90 days prior to the effective date that we will go over a little later. The next date is the expiration date. Sorry. Yeah, expiration date. This is, we will cover the specifics of the specific deliverables for this grant. Keep in mind these deliverables are due by this expiration date. If for whatever reason the project runs into delays, we are able to process extensions. However, we do ask at least 1 month notice in the grantee's plan to request one. This gives us enough time to get the paperwork updated before the current window closes. And if you are a recent grantee, you will remember that in the application process, like Patty said, we do give a few options for expiration date, just kind of depending on what the project entails and how long, if you have, winter project, etc. So we give some options for expiration dates. Nope. The vendor it displays the entity's name and the address and contact information. Another note, we use vendor, grantee, and contractor interchangeably as well. And down here, if you have only state funding, you will have 2 lines, each line for each fiscal year, which I will go into a little bit later. If you have SPF funding, you will have 3 line items, and it just kind of separates those amounts out. And then down here is the total grant amount. And again, it is reiterating the service from and the service to dates that all project activities and reimbursable costs must follow strictly between those 2 dates. Okay, now we're down to the statement of work, SOW, SOW is Exhibit A. It goes by many names. Like I said, the pages that I just showed you with just state funding will complete the purchase order. Unless you have SPF funds, and then there's an Exhibit B. The statement of work is essentially the action plan for a grant project. It outlines the specific work the grantee have committed to perform, the locations where that work will take place, and the documentation, such as photos or reports, that the grantee needs to provide to show the project is complete. Ultimately, it serves as the roadmap that connects the funding to the actual results in the field. So following the distribution of award letters, we begin to collaborate with the grantees to review and revise the statement of work. This allows us to edit the document alongside the grantee, ensuring that objectives and deliverables are accurately aligned with the project goals. Okay, for the project description and objective, this section serves as a high-level introduction to the grantee's work. We intentionally keep this summary broad to provide the grantee with the flexibility needed to manage their project. Contractor, this section contains the formal identification of the grant. It confirms the organization legal name alongside the federal award details. If you do not have SBF fundings, you will not have these last 4 items in your statement of work. Definition is the next section. This defines the common terminology used throughout the purchase order. As I mentioned earlier, you'll see terms like contractor and grantee used interchangeably. This section also defines the specific state quarters, which are the standard periods we use for tracking, and we will dive deeper into that a little later. The personnel section, it identifies the primary contact of the grant. It also outlines in these later numbers, it outlines that if there's any change in personnel, such as a new project manager or a change in staff, the grantee must be notified the state within 2 weeks of the change. And then there will be a lot of reminders throughout the purchase order, but if you have SBF funds, it is very important to keep your U.S. Forest Service representative in the know. All of this can be done via email. The next section is performance activities. This is the project's official work plan. It lists the specific tasks and milestone the grant team must complete during the grant period to stay in compliant. Letter A is reiterating that the cover page dates are the official dates and endpoint. To stay in compliance, make sure all the project tasks and expenditures fall within this window. Letter B, while spending is restricted to the start date, the grantee has more flexibility with their match. Like I said before, match can be accrued 90 days before the start date. Patty touched on this as well, the post-award discussion. Following the award and the delivery of the award letter, the grantee will have a post-award discussion with their CDA project manager. And this can be just an email exchange where we touch base to finalize and agree upon the project's specific deadlines and the deliverables. Under performance activities, E through F, they mentioned the quarterly and final reports, which are project's key performance activities. I'm mentioning them now as a high-level overview, but we will cover the full breakdown of these a little later on. Section G through J are kind of custom activities of the grant. Because every Noxious Weed project is unique, these tasks are tailored specifically to the grantee's goal. And then I wanted to also highlight letter K. While some of these look different, they all look different for everyone, but we almost always include a focus on educational and outreach materials or just events. It is a great way to show the community the value of the work being done and build support for future projects. And along those lines, I want to talk about logos. For CDA logos, if the project includes the creation of educational materials such as brochures, signs, or flyers that are funded by the grant, we want to help the grantee get them ready for the public. We ask that the grantee send a draft of the material for the CDA to the CDA before the print or the distribution. We will work with the grantee to ensure the CDA logo is properly included, and this ensures that all materials meet the grant requirements. And then down towards the invoicing, we'll talk about this, but if you do have educational material, we do require copies of the finished items. Letter L through O applies to every grant, and they're always kept in. They represent the core requirements that apply to every grant that we award. Regardless of the project-specific goals, each grantee is responsible for on-the-ground essentials, like locating and treating the noxious weeds, tracking the treated and restored acreage, and monitoring for effectiveness. Additionally, setting up a project and submitting data through EDMAPS is a universal requirement for all projects. Okay, so now we're in the performance standards and requirements section of the statement of work. You can think of the performance standards and requirements as the manual for the statement of work. While the activities we just discussed tell us what grantees are doing, the section explains exactly how they are expected to fulfill those tasks to meet our program's requirements. This section essentially establishes the rule of the road for how the grantee should be running their grant. It outlines the legal hierarchy of the agreement and the grantee's responsibility to stay current with program updates. Basically, this is the administrative framework of the project. So in this same section, we're going to go over the species. So if you're a current grantee, you know that we collaborate with the grantees to estimate the target acreage for each listed species. These figures represent their goal for the grant period. At the end of the project, we'll reference those numbers to see how the grantee's initial targets compare to the actual acreage treated in their final report and dashboard. So number 4 is about integrated weed management. This specifies that the grantee must use integrated weed management techniques. Rather than relying on a single method, we ask that the grantee utilizes the best combination of biological, cultural, mechanical, and chemical tools to fulfill the project goals effectively. And again, these apply to every grant. These will stay in every single statement of work. Number 5 through 6 is a section about proving the impact of the work being done. The grantee will need to keep track of the treated and restored acres and use photo points to show the before and after progress. All of this information, including the EDMAPS data, eventually feeds into the project dashboard to help show the success of the grant, like Patty was saying, and that we will be talking about a little later. Okay, number 7 and 8 are dependent on what the project is for each grant. They are tailored to the grantee's specific project. For example, if the grantee isn't running a landowner cost share program, that section will not appear in the PO. Again, we customize these sections as we work with the grantee. Number 9 through 12, this section contains boilerplate language. It covers some of the legal requirements of the grant. Essentially, it's saying that the grantee is required to abide by all applicable laws, regulations, and permits requirements throughout the project. Most importantly, when it comes to chemical treatments, remember that the label is the law. The grantee must strictly follow all herbicide label directions and use the proper personal protective equipment. Beyond just following the rules, we at CDA expect the grantee to use the best practices for every treatment method they choose. And then finally, this section is also talking about while the grantee can purchase necessary supplies, please remember that the only items bought within the specific PO dates are reimbursable. So the dates keep coming up. Number 13 is just saying that CDA provides standardized templates for quarterly reports and final reports, as well as tables. Mapping data is handled through EDMAPS. But these reports can be submitted in a few different formats, such as Word, Excel, or PDF. 14 and 15, I'm not going to go into great detail because Emily and Truman are going to be going over that more in depth, but this section covers the mapping and data requirements, specifically how to use EDMAPS and track the project in the new grants dashboard. 16 and 17 is just an introduction to quarterly and final reports that I will be going into greater detail a little bit later. So the next section that we're going to talk about is deliverables and acceptance. This section defines the specific task, report, and data that the grant team must submit to fulfill their contract and receive payment. It serves as a checklist for the project's completion, ensuring all work meets the required standards and deadlines before it is officially approved by CDA. Number one, it talks about the quarterly report. I will go into more detail about that. Basically, the quarterly report is a short 2-page Word document with a few questions regarding the work that was completed during that period. The grantee has a 30-day window to provide CDA with the final quarterly report. For an example, the first quarterly report that will come out this year is April 1st through June 30th. Your grant manager will send you a template and a reminder in early of July. And then the quarterly report is due to CDA by July 30th. So you have that 30-day window to give that quarterly report to the CDA. Number two, again, is just referencing back to the mapping. As a deliverable, all that the mapping requirements, that is due on the expiration date. And same with the final report that we'll go into later is due on the expiration date, by the expiration date on the front page. Dashboard information, same thing. Is that all of that information is due by the expiration date. And then the final invoice, number 6 here, we are going to go back a little bit more into. That is not due until 45 days after the expiration date, but we will get more into that a little later. Okay, so this is a good example of the budget table. This example displays all 5 federal categories to show that the full scope of how costs can be tracked. Keep in mind that every project is unique. So each specific table will be tailored to specific goals. For instance, if a project does not utilize SPF funds, this last column will not be there. And same with the performance category. I should elaborate. So if you don't plan on having a seasonal, this would not be present. For the fiscal year split, a common question that we receive is why is there a fiscal year split in the purchase order? And I'm going to walk you through that right now. The state of Colorado operates on a fiscal year that runs from July 1st to June 30th. The legislature passes a long bill every spring to fund the government for the upcoming year. Because this annual grant spans across July 1st, it is technically touches 2 different state budget years. Some things to note on fiscal year 2026, these numbers, so in this example, for $4,500, those are guaranteed funds that we have in the bank. This amount will roll over, but this $3,700 is not guaranteed funding until the long bill is finalized. Specifically for this year, the long bill was just finalized, so these are available, but it depends on every year to if the long bill is finalized. I should also note for SPF funding, those funds are more flexible and they can be spent in either fiscal year without the same restrictions. It is important that the project manager of the grant is keeping track of expenses and informing CDA in case there needs to be modifications, which I will talk about very soon. Number 2 talks about match. There is a 1-to-1 match requirement for this grant. This means for every dollar received for the grant, you can contribute $1 towards the project cost. Um, the grantee does have flexibility to meet this requirement using two different methods, such as cash or in kind. There is not a minimum cash requirement for this particular grant. Um, if you are using, say, an employee time as match, it's important to keep track of their time for that specific project, and a spreadsheet with the information would suffice. It's just really important to keep track of that throughout the season. The restrictions for match is federal. If you have SPF funding, um, the match cannot be from another federal source. And for state funding, the match cannot be from other state funding unless approved by CDA. Okay, I'm gonna go back up. So for number four is talking about if a grantee needs to do any modifications. There's a 10% threshold. Sorry. The grantee has the ability to move 10% of their total fund between categories. There are three times where the grantee will need a modification request from CDA, and that is if they want to move more than 10% of the total grant between categories. And then another reason is if the original table, say if you didn't have personnel, something went awry and you wanted to use the funds to use for a seasonal, that would be adding a category to the Excel sheet or to the budget sheet. So that would also need a request. And then the other request is if there's basically any major change of scope to the statement of work. If you have any questions, just let us know. An example of that, if you wanted to change the acreage drastically that we just discussed, if there's something drastic like that to make a change, that would require a request. Um, it's really easy, honestly. If you do need to make some movements, more than 10%, etc., just email us. Give us the information. I'm going to show you a really cool budget, an Excel sheet that helps with calculations. And it's just a matter of letting us know what and why, and then we'll print off that string of email and put it in the particular folder for reference. So if you're ever in doubt, just ask your grant manager, and we can work it from there. Another thing I really want to emphasize, though, I should have said this first. If you do need to make a major change, like I just said, more than 10%, that needs the approval from CDA needs to happen before those funds are spent differently. So example, if you moved a bunch of funding to supplies from personnel and the seasonal didn't work out, so you use those funds for supplies and materials, you can't just tell us after the fact. You have to let us know before you're using those funds, if that makes sense. Okay, the last section is invoicing. So this is telling us what is required to be reimbursed. The final invoice is which I'm going to be going over a little bit, is required. That is due on by the expiration date of the grant. And number 3. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. The final invoice is due 45 days after the grant. The final report is due on by the expiration of the date. Anyway, so the final invoice is what we need. This invoice needs to be to CDA. It needs to reference your specific POGD number. It has to have a date, an invoice number, and both a bill to and a remit to address. This document is typically generated by the grantee's organization's financial department or treasurer. And so that's kind of what we need for the final invoice. And then along with that, within 45 days, we also need supporting documents. These documents kind of differ from what the project looks like. For example, if you didn't have a seasonal, you're not going to have the certified payroll, and etc. But so the rest of this just kind of lists. This is the list that we need in order to get the grantee reimbursed. And then this final is just, like I said, there's two Emilys. We get it. It's confusing. If you want to if it goes to the wrong Emily, it's not a big deal, is basically what I'm trying to say. Okay, so the next document I'm going to show you is a quarterly report. This is the primary purpose of a quarterly report is to provide a regular check-in on project progress and budget status. It ensures that both of the grantees and the CDA are aligned, allowing for early detection of issues and smoother management. So this first page is just kind of the basic information. For the summary section, we really want to see the highlights of what is happening during that quarter. A great tip here is to look back at the performance activities and the statement of work. And this is quarterly reports are a really good way to let CDA know what's going on, basically. This next question is a reminder that we need photos. Photos are the best way to prove the impact of work done to the state and local stakeholders. It's just re-emphasizing that before photos, and photos are really important. I understand that if you're a sprayer, taking a photo is probably not your highest priority, but we really appreciate it. Modifications we touched on, but I'm going to go further into the next sheet. And then for the budget summary, this is filling out the quarterly. It ensures the grantee stays on track with fiscal year deadlines. So that's the quarterly report. I feel like it's not too scary. So that's what the quarterly report looks like. And again, it will be due 30 days after the end of the quarterly report. So in my last example, April 1st through June 30th, this quarterly report will be due by July 30th. So. This is a budget modification sheet that I talked about a little bit earlier. It looks intimidating, but it's really, really useful. If you have any questions, if you're unsure, if you need to make modifications, this basically does the calculations for you. This first table is the original amounts. The second table right here is the proposed modification. And then this box right here does the calculations for you, like I said. In this particular example, this person wanted to remove $5,000, which is 13%, which is why it's negative, because they're moving those funds to other categories. And so it'll tell you, obviously $4,000 is the 10% threshold. So this would require a modification request from CDA. Another thing I want to point out that's helpful is this should be 0. This is a calculation that it helps. So if you're moving things around and you get a little messed up. You forgot, where you put what number. This number should always be zero, and if it's not zero, that means that there's something wrong within the movement of the numbers. Okay, so now we're going to go to the final report. This final report, the first page is an overview. It has kind of the basic information. Again, so we have been redoing the final reports this last year since we know that the dashboard is becoming into play. So this information right here is laid out really well, so you'll be able to copy and paste to the dashboard. So it's the same information, you're just putting it in the dashboard, basically. So that is the overview page. Again, it's the acres treated. This is like all the total, the summary. The next tab is the specifics. So you list out each species. Again, this is where you put where the acres proposed in the statement of work. And then we ask that you divide out the amount of acres depending on how they were treated. And this is the outreach event page. If you did have events that are associated with the grant, this is a great place. This is where you put that information, the type of event that it was, the number of attendees, etc. And this last one is the actual budget expense report. So let's see here. In this tab, you will list all of the money spent on the project and the matching funds you provided. It does look just like the budget in the application process, and it does use automatic totals to keep the math simple. I'm going to go through the categories. I'm just going to highlight a couple of the categories since there's a lot of confusion. For travel, the travel is an all-encompassing amount based on FEMA rates. So at CDA, we don't reimburse for mileage on top of travel on whatever. It's all just basically all encompassed in a FEMA rate. And then for administrative costs, if the grant is less than 10,000, the maximum amount of administrative costs that you can have is 10%. If the grant is larger than 10%, that number goes down to 5% that you can have for administrative costs. And just back to the form, the activity description, the more description you can give us, the better. D is where you put in the actual funding, the CDA funding. The rest of this row is for cash funds. And then down below is the in-kind itemization. Again, the more that you tell us or explain, the better. And then down here, it will add everything up for you, and including match. So it will tell you if there's enough match. So that's kind of, and then the gray areas, you don't need to be touched or anything like that, and everything will be added for you. Okay, so the final thing that I'm going to talk about is the final report form. Again, this is from last year's. It's not going to look exactly the same. The first page is the signature, which is really important because it's saying that you did everything that the PO said. It's a requirement, basically. The next section is the project narrative. These are just questions like if you were able to do the quarterly report, if you were able to do the ed maps. And this is where we are talking about the success story, which is new. Like Patty was saying, the success stories are really important because it shows everyone the great work that these funds are doing. And then the last part is the financial narrative. And this just kind of asks you, if you did require a modification, if it was more than 10%. And then there's also kind of this is room for to explain more if there's anything you need to explain in your budget. And then lastly, we already talked about invoice, which is due 45 days after the expiration date. So that was a lot of talking, but I think I covered everything.
Yes, great job, Emily. All
Thank
right.
you.
Do we have any questions? It looks like there's a couple in the Q&A box. So first of all, Lucas asked, is the dashboard complete on the website? And so Emily's going to share a little bit more later, but we actually would love for you all to test it this week. So it's not live on our website, but it will be soon. But this week will be kind of a testing phase, and then we will we will put it on the website after that. So we'll kind of wipe the fake data. Let's see. There's a couple questions. Did you mention where the quarterly reports could be found? So the quarterly reports, Emily, did you want to answer that or do you want me to just do it?
You can go ahead.
Okay, so I think Emily mentioned, but typically right after the end of a quarter, your grant manager is going to send out the quarterly report to you. I think it's also on our website under the grants page. If it's not, we will make sure the newish version gets in there. But yes, they will also be emailed out to all grantees basically early July, and then again, if in early October, unless your grant is already closing, and then you'll just do your final report at that time. Okay, and then the travel budget item. So, can you explain the travel budget item in a little more detail? So there's first of all, there's a number of things actually that can go in that travel line. What Emily was explaining was travel via equipment or equipment rates. So for example, if you have hotel costs, per diem, those things all can go in travel. And then on top of that, though, if you're wanting to be reimbursed for mileage, let's say for your spray truck, that's great. You can do that. You can't also be reimbursed for things like tires or oil changes. So the mileage rate is all encompassing for the use of equipment, and equipment is captured in those FEMA tables. So similarly with like an off-road vehicle, sometimes the FEMA rates are by miles and sometimes they're by hourly rates. And so you kind of have to look at the different equipment that you're using and find the closest related item in the FEMA rates. And then that's how you'll get reimbursed for that item, or that's how you can use that item for match. So it's either going to be like a mileage or an hourly rate. And I think that's all I needed to cover in that. Is there any other items for travel that you guys can think of that I missed? No. Okay. Yeah, but yeah, all the other things are fine too. Hotels, per diem. Um, can't think of anything else on the top of my head, but basically Emily was talking about equipment for that travel piece.